Hey everyone, so something amazing happened this chapter. One of my viewers actually predicted the big twist of this chapter 3 weeks ago, and they very likely also solved the mystery behind this big twist. So listen up, the Straw Hats got separated on the way to Elbaf, and in my chapter review for chapter 1124, I shouted out one of my top tier patrons, VW22333, for making an absolutely brilliant spot-on prediction, which is that the Straw Hats would be separated on the way to Elbaf. And along with this prediction, he seemed to have deducted exactly who separated the Straw Hats and how. As all of you know, my top tier patrons can always submit their thoughts on the chapter when it comes out, and I'll always shout out one of them who stands out the most at the end of the chapter review. And this has been by far the best, most spot-on prediction from any Voice of the People in history. Because VW2233 realized that the Straw Hats sailing to Elbaf on 2 separate ships was extremely suspicious, particularly because the character that had been hyped up the most in recent times as an important upcoming figure was the mysterious man marked by flames, who is characterized by traveling around and creating vortexes to sink ships. So if you think about it, we're heading to Elbaf, we're having this character built up who is this man marked by flames who travels around creating vortexes and whirlpools. We can assume that this character is going to make his debut in the story in some dramatic way very soon, considering on the way to Elbaf, Kid was talking about this character. In this past arc of Egghead Island, they were hyping up this character as potentially carrying the last road poneglyph. Elbaf is set to be the arc where all the 4 poneglyphs are likely set to finally be assembled. We knew that this character was coming sooner or later, we just didn't know how or when, so what better way to introduce him in dramatic fashion than with his signature act of creating some sort of a vortex or whirlpool at sea that causes chaos for our protagonists, thereby creating the perfect mechanism to separate the Straw Hats, because that's exactly why Oda had them travel on 2 separate ships in the first place, to have this encounter with the man marked by flames leading up to Elbaf, thereby separating the 2 crews in a manner that also moved the plot forward as it established this new character, the man marked by flames, as a threat in one direction, while also likely setting up an Elbaf storyline for the other characters in another direction, and obviously likely leading to the 2 plot lines conjoining at some point down the line, with everyone eventually getting to Elbaf, just likely at different rates, and thereby having set up a lot more story in the process. So this was in the first place an absolutely brilliant prediction by VW22333, and he also very likely solved the mystery behind this new plot twist that we just caught in that same prediction that he did 3 weeks back. So seriously, VW2233, if you're watching, shoutouts to you. People in the comments, give him props. This is why you should always watch the Voice of the People segments at the end of these videos, because I always shout out the one that stands out the most, and lots of times you all are able to come up with absolutely brilliant predictions for the chapters that I myself would not have thought of organically. And obviously, if you all want to voice your own thoughts or predictions that could get shouted out in these chapter reviews, then you can support me on Patreon to get yourself into one of the Voice of the People. So yeah, I think VW22333 is 100% correct. Obviously, the Straw Hats have been separated, and I definitely think that it was done by the man marked by flames, because why build up this character so much in recent times? Why establish that he has the 4th road poneglyph, which we all imagine that the road poneglyphs are going to be a key plot point in the Elbaf arc? Why build him up heading into Elbaf with Captain Kidd talking about him, the Blackbeard Pirates talking about him? Why do all that and then specifically explain that he creates whirlpools at sea, and then create this setup with the Straw Hats being on separate ships and somehow being separated through some unknown calamity, other than to introduce this character, the man marked by flames? So I'm almost certain that he is behind it. That's a really exciting prospect, because we're going to meet essentially the final significant character in One Piece yet to be revealed in the next couple chapters or so. Now, I also want to talk about the Blackbeard Pirates and the Red-Haired Pirates, but I want to elaborate on this point slightly more, which is that the situation that Nami has now found herself in, it is not necessarily done by the man marked by flames, because for all we know, he could have just created the whirlpool that separated the ships, and then the Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Nami, Chopper group ended up in a certain location, from where on they were then, made prisoners of some sort, or dressed up in some sort, as we kind of see with Nami at the end of the day. So this is not necessarily them being his captives. It could have just been them being hit by a whirlpool and then washing ashore somewhere. It's kind of similar to how Luffy and the crew got separated for a bit at the beginning of Wano with a waterfall. I've seen some people suggest that Luffy, Zoro, Nami, their group has already ended up at Elbaf. I don't know how that would be possible, considering there's still some ways away from it, but, it's One Piece. Anything is technically possible. And most importantly, I think that separating the Straw Hats at this point in time is the best move that Oda could possibly have done from a character writing perspective. I'm not going to elaborate on that too much here, but all I will say is that, especially in the Egghead arc, you could feel how deprived the Straw Hats were of just general basic character writing all throughout that arc. That is something that has been desperately needed for a long time, and in particular for some Straw Hats more than others. Separating the two groups, working with smaller groups of characters, that is the best way to give more character focus to certain individuals. It's when you're working with giant ensembles and there's 20 speech bubbles going on at a given time, and there's just too much to focus on, that's when it starts to feel like the Straw Hats are basically just NPCs walking around with no real significance of their own. If you disagree, that's fine. I'm going to be doing a video in the near future breaking down why more focus on the Straw Hats, and in particular certain individual Straw Hats, is desperately needed at this point in the story, and why a lot of the reason that we've been lacking it for so long is because there's just been so many characters that we've been having to work with over the past couple arcs between Egghead, Wano. Whole Cake Island was a very nice exception, but then before that, Dressrosa, Punk Hazard, so on. So to me, this was the best move I could have done, a much needed move, and it very elegantly sets up the man marked by flames, so a lot of things are just clicking here. Now I want to talk about the Red-Haired Pirates and the Blackbeard Pirates section of this chapter. I feel like with the Blackbeard Pirates, what we got is, some much needed time with the whole crew together, and I just like the dynamics of them quite a bit. Small things that make them, just a little bit unique, that the way that they dock their ships when they get back is Avalo Pizarro actually picks them up and, places them back where they're supposed to be. It's just a cool little environment that they've set up for themselves. There's a bit more tension between the crewmates, but it actually doesn't seem to be anything too serious. They're just a crew filled with big personalities that are all evil in their own ways and all conniving in their own ways, so it's fun seeing them butt heads. What we got here was kind of just some necessary little follow-up on the whole Garp Kobe situation, and just re-establishing the Blackbeard Pirates as a full crew, because I don't think we've really seen them as a full crew in quite some time now. So just seeing the whole squad essentially together, at least on the same island, even if not all of them in the same room, that was really good. I think this was the best spread that we've gotten to see of the Blackbeard Pirates post-time skip. So while that section of the chapter was cool to see, I thought the much more interesting section of the chapter that next Tuesday's video will be elaborating on in depth, because I think a lot of people don't understand the full ramifications of what just happened here. We had the scene with the Red-Haired Pirates and Bartolomeo. I loved the scene because in general, I like One Piece scenes that take their time. I think in particular, in the post-time skip, one of the things that I've been missing the most is just generally Oda taking his time to direct a scene at extended length and slow pacing throughout a given chapter, because there's so much that needs to happen. If I go back to Egghead Island, it was just so much happening all over the place all at once. We're just cutting back and forth constantly. You didn't really go more than like 2 pages at most, sticking to a single set of characters before cutting over to another set of characters, especially during Vegapunk's speech, where it was just insane pandemonium as we just read from page to page, cutting each panel to panel from different spot, different character all across the world, and even all across Egghead Island itself, right? So I really enjoyed just the slow scene of Shanks and the Barto Pirates. I really like the vibe that we're getting with Shanks so far, which is basically that he is not an aggressor ever. He doesn't go out of his way to go fight or challenge other people. He simply holds his ground and his territory and creates a sort of umbrella of protection, and that's just how he functions. And that commands a lot of respect in the world without Shanks ever creating too many waves. We saw this just a little bit ago with Captain Kidd. Kidd rolls up, Kidd challenges Shanks. Shanks doesn't even want to mess with Kidd, but he sees that Kidd is trying to attack his subordinates. That's an infraction on Shanks' territory, his subordinates, his fleets, etc., so Shanks takes him out. We see here again, Bartolomeo is disrespecting Shanks' flag. You need to make some sort of a statement. Shanks is not trying to go out, pick fights for no reason, but once you start trying to mess with Shanks' territory and basically create an environment that might be unsafe for those people who are protected in his territory, Shanks has to show up and do something to show that he still stands as protection for the people of that territory and represent what he still stands for his affiliated other fleets, pirates, etc. It would be the same thing as if a subordinate from some other Emperor's crew showed up to Wano and started aggressively doing things and burning Straw Hat Luffy's flag. Luffy kind of has to show up to Wano to basically be like, hey, this is my territory, these are my friends, you work for the Blackbeard Pirates or for Cross Guild or whatever, you gotta stay away from here, and lay down the law a little bit. Shanks himself doesn't even take things too far. It's Yasopp who decides that, well, I want to teach him a little bit of an extra lesson, and just takes out the Bartolomeo crew. So in general, I really like the way that Shanks operates, I like the respect that everyone gives him, and I like the way that he holds his ground no matter what, but he never goes out of his way to be an aggressor in any conflict. He just continues being that sort of paragon of virtue and what Luffy should aspire to be in the One Piece world. And on the flip side, I loved what we got to see from Bartolomeo this chapter, because Bartolomeo is, in many ways, he feels like a gag character. He's just so unreasonably devoted to Luffy, but in a way, Bartolomeo sort of represents us, the fans, sense, and that, we process everything that Luffy and the Straw Hats have done, and we're able to appreciate and recognize how great Luffy is, how great his crew is, all the good that they do in the world, like the pedestal that we, the reader, put Luffy and the Straw Hats on. Bartolomeo does that in real life as a fan of them in universe. So to see Bartolomeo, even though he is exaggerated and just a caricature of a diehard fanboy, it's not all a joke. Bartolomeo realizes how great Luffy is, and he would genuinely put his life down on the line without a second thought to protect Luffy, because he knows that that's the man who is meant to become Pirate King. The loyalty is in fact kind of insane to think about, because no one asked Bartolomeo to drink that on the spot. He could have taken the poison, pretended like he's gonna go do something to Luffy and feed him the poison, and then not actually do it. But Bartolomeo is just so hardwired to defend Luffy at all costs that he immediately, without a moment of hesitation, just takes that bullet for Luffy in a manner that he really did not need to. It just made me gain so much more respect for his character. Even though he'd already earned some of that respect in Dressrosa, this is one of the coolest moves I've ever seen someone do out of loyalty. And then on the flip side, I still like the weightiness and seriousness that Oda is giving this whole situation and what it means to be an emperor and to defend your territories and to set an example. Because even though Bartolomeo showed that he's a really good person and he sort of passed Shanks' little trick or his test or whatever he was doing for him, that still doesn't let Bartolomeo and his crew off the hook. They still need to be punished in some way, despite that extraordinary display of loyalty and virtue. So I just love the whole way that scene played out, what it meant for Bartolomeo and his crew, and what it meant for Shanks and his crew. I'm just excited to be seeing more of Shanks and the Red-Haired Pirates in the near future. And finally, it's time to shout out this week's Voice of the People from my top tier patrons. So Sunnyclip says, I don't think the separation will last long, but it's cool that the East Blue 5 and Chopper are grouped together. There's a palace vibe, so I think it might be Loki doing something. Yeah, I think that's the most interesting thing about the Straw Hat separation. It's the fact that Oda chose to take the original 5, and then obviously Chopper as well, and section them off, and then take all the newer Straw Hats and section them off. That distinction alone carries meaning in some way, because before, when the Straw Hats were separated between Dressrosa and Whole Cake Island, it was kind of arbitrary who went in which half. So the fact that the crew is being separated in terms of when they actually join the crew, and that also strongly correlates to how much story time these different groups of Straw Hats have had over the course of all of One Piece, I think to me that suggests that there's a lot of potential for good character writing, because there is such a clear divide between what Group A represents and what Group B represents, and what each group kind of needs at this point in the story. As for whether or not it might be Loki who has kidnapped Nami, I definitely think that's a possibility. Some people have suggested that, Loki might want to marry Nami because that was his whole plot before, at least that we were told of back in Whole Cake Island, and interestingly, Nami even heard that story of Loki and his marriage back then, so that might have been a little bit of setup of Nami finding herself in that predicament down the line. Not to mention, this is not the first time that Nami has been forcibly almost wed off to somebody. See the Thriller Bark arc. I do hope that we're not just retreading that same old plotline, and I think it would be kind of crazy that that group of Straw Hats somehow got to Elbaf way faster than the Giant ship. But again, we don't know for sure what mysterious phenomenon caused the separation. I still lean towards the man marked by flames, but if that's the case, you would think you would find the Straw Hats shipwrecked somewhere, or alternatively imprisoned by the man marked by flames, and, Nami doesn't seem to be in chains or anything. So this whole situation is really, really bizarre and leads to some very interesting possibilities and speculations that I'm extremely excited to find out about. I think this is one of the coolest ways to launch the Elbaf arc in a way that readers really cannot predict the direction that things are going whatsoever. I also think that this chapter set up a particularly huge incident that I will be talking about in next Tuesday's video, so watch out for that. And I will talk to you all next week.